It started as an argument between me and my father as to where tools should belong in his garage. There were words, angry words, and then there was a punch-up. I moved out of the house that day. I was 18 years old. I packed my bags and I was gone. Smug in this self-smugness that comes with being a teenager. My mother would say later that it was a relief to her that I had moved out, because with both my father and me in the one house, it was like having two angry bears circling each other in the cave. But it hadn't always been like that. In my memory, I'm a little tacker, 4, 5 years old, and I'd often walk to the end of our street to wait for my father to come home from work, because I delighted in clambering into the passenger seat beside him while he drove up the rest of the street and up our driveway. But there were times when he didn't arrive and I would have to just walk home because it was getting dark. I'm 7, 8 years old. We're sitting around the dinner table and the question again is coming up. Mum, when is Dad coming home? And Mum would sigh and say, just eat your dinner. There were birthday candles blown out without Dad there. I later came to realise that Dad was absent. And when he was home, he was somehow distant. He just wasn't with us. And I grew up with that feeling that I was missing out on something with my father. At 10, 11 years old, I have a little family of guinea pigs in their hutch in the backyard. And one night, they were all killed by rats. I went up to the backyard to find their bodies strewn across the backyard, and the babies, the parents, and I was shattered. I was distraught. I was filled with guilt. I could not express my grief. I was bawling my eyes out to my father, and my father said, "Don't be a crybaby. That's not manly." And I somehow learned to hide my emotions from then on. So when it came to that tipping point with my father in the garage, there'd been a long build-up to get to that tipping point. I did not know my father because it was only after he died suddenly in 1993 that my mother was able to tell the story. He had been the whipping boy, if you like that term, the whipping boy in his family, a stern disciplinarian father. He had gone into the army with the outbreak of World War II and was captured at Dunkirk and spent most of the war in a prisoner of war camp in Poland, from which he made numerous escape attempts. commandant got so sick of his escape attempts that he stood him in front of a firing squad, put a Luger to his temple, and pulled the trigger. Click. And he said words to the effect, "Let that be a lesson to you, Sergeant Lynch. Don't do it again." The only thing that saved my father was he was red-headed and blue-eyed. So in the eyes of the Nazis, he was an Aryan race. His one successful escape attempt, he fought with the partisans in Yugoslavia before being recaptured. And he saw some horrific things. Whole villages being stood in front of firing squads and slaughtered by the Nazi troops. All this came out after it was too late. Finally, I understood my father. If we had had those conversations, but he would not allow it. PTSD, we know it now, but it was not spoken about then. You just had to not be a crybaby, be a man and get on with it. So my father had his tipping point, something that tipped him over to be the man he was. And had I known earlier, I would have understood what had brought him to that point. But sadly, he died before I could find out what had been his tipping point.